today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about
what part of your brain do you need to strengthen in order to have a joyful, prosperous marriage and stop having that fight that you can't seem to get out of. Or you've been engaging in that fight, and that nature of that fight is once you are in it, you're in it to win it. And so the first step is to start becoming very conscious about how we relate with screens, starting with the phone. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm Rich Heller, and I'm your host, and we're talking about the brain on conflict. And part of that is how our interactions with screen time, with the digital world, might fuel our emotional reactivity depending on how we approach it. I'm going to tell you, I'm struggling with this episode a little because it's kind of sciencey, right? And what I've noticed about sciencey episodes is people check out pretty fast. So here's what you need to get about this, all right? There's a fight that you've either been avoiding and sort of leading parallel lives because you're afraid that you're going to have that fight, or you've been engaging in that fight. And that nature of that fight is once you are in it, you're in it to win it. And the problem is when you kick your partner's ass and win, you lose because guess what? They're your partner. Now, what we like to do with this problem is go to therapists. Oh, help me to figure out, what's going on here. You tell me what to do. Tell me how to make this work. And I'm not downplaying talk therapy, but I am saying that it's kind of like this. Let's say that you and your partner are running a race together and it's a 1 mile race, but really, you don't ever leave the house. And so what you do is you say, all right, let's go do this 1 mile race. And you go out and you start to run, and like a quarter mile in, you go, oh, frack this. I'm exhausted, right? Because you're not ready for that 1 mile run. Well, that's really the reason why you're having that fight. You engage in disagreement, but the muscles in your brain that you need to make it through disagreement without shredding each other are unused and weak. And so when we go to therapists and ask for help, and marriage counselors and ask for help with this, and they don't talk about this part of the game, then we are kind of set up to lose. In fact, therapy and counseling has at best a 50 to 60% success rate. And what people find is when couples leave the counselor or the therapist, there's a 25% recidivism rate, which means that of the 50% who go there, about 20 to 25% of them actually go backwards, and it's worse than when they started. And it's because, why? It's because they have this part of their brain that needs to be exercised that isn't exercised. And so this episode is about understanding that. Right? You need to know this. It may sound kind of like going to the gym, and it is like going to the gym. Maybe you hate going to the gym, but what you know about going to the gym is it'll make you stronger. This episode will make you stronger. So if it gets a little sciencey, be patient with me. Here's what you need to know. There's a system that interprets the emotions that we're going through. That's called the limbic system, for what it's worth. That's got some parts in it. Hippocampus and amygdala. We're going to go into that deeper. There's another part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the rational part of our brain, right? And what came out in the last episode of Rich in Relationship, and if you didn't listen, you should go back, is that the way we've been using screens since television, not just since social media, is we've been developing our limbic system and not so much our prefrontal cortex. So the limbic system is super emotional, right? It wants happiness, or it wants violence, or it's geared on, is it safe or is it not safe? If it's safe, then it's about joyful pursuits. If it's not safe, it's about fight, flight, or play dead. But all of it's emotional. There's very little logic to it. Think about it this way. With your partner, right? You want to be intimate. There's not a lot of thinking behind that intimacy, let's be honest. I mean, it could be emotional intimacy. You could feel close without it being physical, but there's still not a lot of thinking involved there. That's an emotional experience, and it feels good. Or, on the other side, when it feels unsafe with your partner, you're kind of riled up and triggered. You're like a freaking train on the tracks. And that, again, there's not a lot of thinking. All the thinking gets wrapped around supporting the emotional part, right? That's about the limbic system. That's what you need to know. So we got this part that's all emotional, positive or negative. Now, what happens when you're in the fight is, and we've talked about this in other episodes, a part of your brain called the amygdala hijacks the whole show. I want you to think about it this way. Your brain, your experience with your partner, not your brain, and your brain is a stage, all right? You are putting on a play, just like you did in high school. And there's one part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is rational and reasonable. That's the director, all right? The director has an idea of where the play should go. If there's things that happen that are off script, the director helps get back on script. The limbic system, which is the amygdala and these other parts, they're the players in the play, right? And maybe they're not very mature. Now, if your hippocampus and your amygdala are very well developed, which they are in a lot of us, thanks to all the screen time that we engage in, and the director, your prefrontal cortex, is maybe not so strong, what happens is the show's going on with your partner, right? You have an idea. It's date night. You're going out with your partner and you want to talk about how much you love them and how good it is. And they say something and your amygdala kicks in and says, uh-oh, that looks like a threat. And your amygdala is so strong from being used again and again when we're on social media that it overwhelms the director. And the director's like, no, don't do that, right? And haven't you had that experience where your partner says something and you feel a little off and a part of you is saying, don't go down that road, but you're like, frick it, I'm going there anyway. That's what I'm talking about right there. It's that experience of, I know better, but I'm going to go there. And afterwards, you regret it. But you can't say you regret it because you're deep in justifying the action. That's kind of how the brain is wired. And there are other parts to our brain, and there's more to it than this, but I'm trying to keep it really simple, right? What you need to know is the director, our prefrontal cortex, this is the part that's going to make it all work. This is the part that's going to help us negotiate difference with our partner. This is the part that's going to allow us to have that experience of vulnerability and intimacy. However, because of the way we've been interacting with screens, what we tend to do is we tend to go to a shop. We tend to go shopping online when we want some instant gratification, right? I'm saying we because I do it. The other day, I wasn't feeling so good. I had a really bad day and I was getting ready to go to bed. And I thought, I consciously thought I need to do something to upset this. I know I'm going to go to Amazon and buy a cover for my iPad or whatever it was. It's not an iPad. It's for my Kindle. And I went through a struggle with it too. Like, do I really need this? But then I thought, you know what? I want this. I want the experience. I want the hit of doing something for myself and having something to look forward to that's positive. I actively engaged my limbic system. Now, that was a dance between my prefrontal cortex and my limbic system. I didn't unconsciously go shopping. I consciously went shopping, right? And this is the planet that we want to start going to right here, is where there's awareness that we have this emotional part and where we start to work with it rather than having it work us. Right? The question is, and I've said this before, are you having your emotions or are your emotions having you? When you're in the fight, your emotions have you and you're done, right? You will not get to resolution of difference. You will not get to vulnerability. You will not get to intimacy as long as your emotions are having you. As long as the limbic system is in charge and your prefrontal cortex is tired, weakened, and worn out, you're not going to get there. So during intense emotional systems, the prefrontal cortex either recognizes what's going on and says, whoa, or it allows itself to become overwhelmed by the amygdala. And if you want to have a marriage that works, where you're not having the fight or avoiding the fight, before you go to therapy, you could do some work on your prefrontal cortex, work on your own awareness. And the problem is when our amygdala kicks in, we sit there and we go, it's their fault. They started it. They're the problem. I need to get them because they're appearing as a threat. Or we're running away saying, I can't talk to them because they're dangerous. That's all our limbic system, our amygdala in particular, talking. But when our prefrontal cortex takes charge, it starts to identify our part. Right? And so if we want to have a relationship that works, the first thing we need to work on is our prefrontal cortex, because without it, we won't know what's real and what isn't. Our limbic system is totally emotional. And what we know about the emotions is they're not always grounded in fact. Whereas our prefrontal cortex is a fact machine. Now, here's the thing. Because we've allowed our desire for pleasure or our desire to stimulate our amygdala, I'm going to be the first to admit, I love a good kung fu movie or show or episode, and I like the stimulation of it. I like the adrenaline of it. When we allow those things to be front and center in our lives, when we're not selective about when we watch them, when we're not conscious that we're choosing this and why, our limbic system takes over. And so the first step is to start becoming very conscious about how we relate with screens, starting with the phone, right? If your phone is your biggest interruption and biggest screen, it is the thing that you react to the most because it's there all the time. Text messages popping up, phone calls coming in, emails coming in, messages from apps. Maybe you have a game that you play and you have it giving you messages and it's encouraging you to play the game. Maybe you're getting notifications from Facebook or from Instagram or from TikTok. All of these things are stimulating your limbic system. And so the first thing you need to get control of if you want to start addressing your marriage is your relationship with that screen that's probably in your pocket right now. I know mine is. We can either encourage a cycle of emotional reactivity where we allow our limbic system to seek gratification unconsciously, or we can develop our prefrontal cortex and take control of it. Now, let's talk about that prefrontal cortex a little more. The prefrontal cortex, as I said, is completely rational and logical. Here's some other things you need to know about it. It can only handle so many things at once. The studies show that women can multitask better than men, and that has to do with the number of connections between their lobes that men don't have, that women do have. But also studies show that whether you're a man or a woman, there's only so many things you can handle at one time. And the studies also show that even in the case of multitasking, if you're juggling a couple of tasks at once, your attention is split, your prefrontal cortex's attention is split between those tasks, and you may not do them as well because you're not giving them your full attention. So part one, you need to be very careful who you allow up on the stage of your prefrontal cortex, how distracted you allow to be. And part number two is, it takes emotional energy to make a decision about where you're going to put your attention. So the more distractions come in, the more decisions you have to make to either pay attention to them or not, and the lower your ability to manage distraction becomes. By the end of the day, you're done. Unless you've had a very restful day. And so what we want to do with our prefrontal cortex are two things. Number one, we want to make sure that the distractions are minimal. A simple advice, for example, is when you're working on your computer, make sure that you have 0 notifications coming up. On your phone, you want no notifications. You might want to look at your email twice a day. You might want to check your text messages 4 times a day at the most, but you want to choose to. You don't want to look just because it pops up and makes a demand of you. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not 100% with this on my phone. With my laptop and my computer, I'm really good. It's a work in progress. And that's the other thing is, anytime you develop a new habit that involves your prefrontal cortex, you really only want to tackle one thing at a time. So I wouldn't say kill your screen distraction and your phone distraction and, be careful about how much you watch and what you watch. I wouldn't tackle that all in one go. I'd pick one thing, do it for 30 days. And when you feel like it's a part of you, when you feel like you own it, then take the next thing and just build on this. And so the idea is that over time, we want to strengthen our prefrontal cortex by eliminating distractions. We want to strengthen our prefrontal cortex with a number of exercises that we're going to talk about later on in this podcast if you stay tuned to us. And we want to make sure that anytime we engage in our limbic system, that our prefrontal cortex makes a conscious decision that it's going to do that. What we're doing is we're moving from a place where in our primary relationship, which is our partnership, we're making as many conscious decisions as possible. When you're out driving, you want to make unconscious decisions all day long. But when you're there with the person who matters most to you, you want to be very cognizant and conscious of why you're saying what you're saying and where it is you want to go with it. So I want you to, your call to action for today is I want you to pick one area where you're interacting digitally with the world and make a decision about how you're going to limit it so that you're less distracted. And I would suggest either when you're working on your computer, make sure that you turn off all the notifications so that there's no interruptions, or on your phone, eliminate any interruptions that are not from your partner, because if you ignore him or her, you might make bigger problems down the road. Want to pick one of those things and just start limiting those interruptions so that you are consciously choosing what it is you focus on when you're on your computer or on your phone. Make some conscious decisions about that. And there's a ton of information out there about how to do that and ways that you might do that. And we're going to work on this more and more here at Rich in Relationships, so stay tuned. If you're liking what you're hearing, if this is helping you out, I want you to subscribe and I want you to invite your friends to listen. And in the meantime, have a wonderful tomorrow.